What would it be like to combine the use of psychedelics with nondual teachings and practices on the pathless path of spiritual awakening? Rather than inducing an altered state, how does a journey with ayahuasca or other plant medicines actually offer an enhanced version of our natural state that reveals the unlimited dimensions of non-dual reality? And how does ayahuasca confront us with an alternate intelligence completely different from our own that invites us to surrender to the sacred mystery that's ultimately in charge? Welcome to the Non-Dual Wisdom and the Pathless Path podcast. I'm your host, Stephan Bodian. I'm a spiritual teacher, a licensed psychotherapist, and the author of Meditation for Dummies, Wake Up Now, Beyond Mindfulness, and my new book, Infinite Awakening, a guide to non-dual wisdom and the pathless path. Today I explore these and other questions in wide-ranging conversation with Zen teacher Ryushin Marchaj. Ryushin has been a Zen Buddhist priest for over 30 years and is the former abbot of Zen Mountain Monastery in Mount Tremper, New York, and a Dharma successor of John Daido Luri. Since 2014, he's been rigorously exploring and training in ayahuasca ceremonies in various traditions and leading retreats that combine ayahuasca and Zen meditation. He's also a teacher through A Path Between Worlds, a program that combines psychedelics with Buddhist teachings and practices. Okay, welcome Ryushin. Good to see you again. I'm going to begin with a little introduction to our connection, how we got connected to begin with, and what prompted me to invite you onto the podcast, and then we'll go from there. Mm-hmm. So you and I connected maybe a few months ago now, and I became very interested in what you were up to, which is combining psychedelics and Zen meditation. It was something that I had begun to think about on my own, and then I was asked to talk to an online forum about psychedelics. And the woman who runs the forum said, I know this interesting man who's a Zen monk and also very involved with psychedelics. Maybe you might be interested in talking with him. So we got together online and chatted a bit, and I found that we had a lot in common. In fact, you were ordained in the same lineage and practiced in the same Zen lineage as I have, and your teacher, Daido Luri, was a compatriot of mine at the Zen Center where I practiced. So that is our close Dharma connection. And at the same time, I'd already become interested in this interface and discovered that you've been exploring this for over a decade, which to me is fascinating and will, of course, be the main topic that we'll be discussing. For me, after 50 years of not taking psychedelics, which I did a few times in college, I took a few psilocybin journeys in the last year, a couple of years, and found them really quite powerful and revelatory. And I started to wonder how these two might work together. You know, were people exploring this already? And then I discovered you, So here we are. We've talked about this somewhat, and I have also discovered this program you're involved with, which we will talk about as well. So where I'd like to begin with you is, first of all, is what got you involved in Zen, in this whole awakening project, And what was your particular brand of suffering, I would say, since it's almost occasionally there are people who are drawn by curiosity alone, but for most of us, it's suffering, right? And so I'm wondering what form of suffering drew you, and then why Zen of all the other paths you could have chosen? Huh?
Yeah, yeah. Um, uh, what kind of suffering? Run-of-the-mill average human suffering.
Which
I, you
you
know, I
experiences.
don't think that I have any claim on anything exquisite. It's unique, obviously, based on my history, my karma, and
Yeah,
everything
yeah.
else. But I really think there was really nothing unusual about what I went through in my early years. Um, I think that there was a seed of something that was planted very, very early on meaning there was an experience when I was 10, 11 years old. There was an experience of something that seeded itself in my psyche, but that it disappeared. It faded into the background, and it was not until I was given instructions in meditation that I realized the nature of the problem. So it was kind of a reverse engineering that, in my teenage years, college years, early adulthood, in pursuing the conventional responses, to what I felt I needed to do to be fulfilled and successful. And I think I did a decent job, in training as an anthropologist, dabbling in art, and then moving into a medical school and becoming a pediatrician and a psychiatrist. All of that was fulfilling something that was quite profound, and I was decent at doing it. And at the same time, as frequently happens, there was a kind of a nagging sense of dissatisfaction, of something being missing. And I think that was continuously being informed by the fact that I touched the water of the cloud of unknowing, the mystery, whatever you want to call it. So again, just like everybody else, I was plugged into a reality as it is, while pursuing the reality as defined as successful by the human species in our culture. And it wasn't until the moment, for one reason or another, that in a relationship with who was to become my wife, Iris gave me instructions in Shamatha Vipassana. And I remember that that's really the beginning of reorientation. Because it was almost at the instant that I was given the solution that I realized the problem, or that the problem felt safe to define itself, which I
Right.
think happens a lot, and that balance between something that we're trusting intuitively, and the tension of the deep questions, doubts, anxiety, existential angst. The tension between that is always fascinating and so important, because you don't want to understand suffering too quickly and completely unless you trust that there is a way of addressing it. It becomes a nihilistic, profoundly dark process if we're stuck and we don't see the possibility, or we don't intuit, or we don't trust, or we don't have faith in the possibility that there may be a way of resolving this fundamental problem. But so for me, the teachings of meditation and the recognition that I was given the tool to absolutely, and in an instant, I was seeing that the instructions were clear, they were classical, they were traditional, they
All
were
right.
coming out of the kind of a Cornfield, Goldstein, Sharon, the IMS, Goenka, that whole tradition. So because it was rigorously described to me, it contained all of the information that essentially was necessary, and there was a sense of, like, now it's up to me. I have been
Uh-huh.
released from.
And you had confidence in
Yeah.
the path that was laid out for you.
Well, at that point, there was no path yet. That was the thing. I mean, that's, the switch to Zen is the recognition just how wide and how deep the path actually was. This was simply meditation, and I took to it like a fish to water. Meaning, from that point on, probably, this is like 80, 81. I don't think I missed a day of sitting in my life, There was just this sense of an instantaneous recognition, and that was the arrogance showing up, because at that point, my sense was that I didn't need anybody, that the only thing I needed is meditation. And it took 4 or 5 years to realize just how insanely wrong I was and how deluded and how arrogant, how that kind of an arrogance of self-sufficiency or, isolation or capacity to do this on my own took a turn. And, my mind released, and what started to manifest was not what I was hoping for. For a while it seemed like everything was going right. There was a sense of loosening up, and then after about a year, the whole thing just collapsed on itself, and the only thing I started seeing is the insane pain and craziness and woundedness of who I was, and my incapacity to really
I think people are often shocked when they begin meditating or begin the path in any way to discover that it actually makes them feel worse rather than better.
Absolutely.
and that's really the first step. Like Trungpa used to say, disappointment is really good news. You have that disappointment, then you start realizing what more there is to work on.
Well, but again, it's that disappointment is a good news if you have somebody to help you with the disappointment. And that was where, Zen showed up, and it wasn't Zen that showed up, it was a person. So once again, I think more often than not, we are drawn to pursue things that are connected to kind of a commonsensical appreciation of what we need. And what I needed is just another human being who was wiser than me to tell me that I wasn't completely screwed up and that I wasn't going psychotic and that I wasn't a horrible monster that I suddenly started seeing myself. And, with Dairo it was just wonderful because he kind of listened to my stories and said, it's okay. Everything you're going through is okay. And then that becomes a good news.
Yeah, that's very similar for me. It's always been the personal connection with the teacher throughout my path, throughout my journey. I've had very close connections with teachers, and they've exemplified for me what I was looking for and who I wanted to become or discover. And at the same time, they were profound guides on the journey. In fact, on the East Coast, I didn't connect with a teacher when I first started practicing, but eventually I found this flyer, this kind of I don't know what they call it, a leaflet that unfolded and showed Tassajara in black and white and Suzuki Roshi lifting stones, and building walls. And I thought, this guy, I want to study with him. So I engineered my life so I would end up in California, and I met Suzuki Roshi and had an opportunity to sit with him for the final year and a half of his life. And
how wonderful, Stephen. I mean, that's
profound. Profound impression that he made, and from then on I had a number of really beautiful teachers. So that personal connection to me has always been really crucial on my journey, really, I would say essential. And the first time I started practicing Zen, after a really bad psychedelic trip, by the way, I had a trip, a journey in New York when I was at Columbia, and ended up in the hospital. And then I thought, I can't keep doing this. This is not working. And so I went to a Zen center, the first one of the first Zen centers in the U.S. And I sat with this group, and I thought, this is home. I've come home. And that was it. Like you, I feel I've come home. So that there's a way in which karmically it's like a lock and a key, huh? The key goes into the lock, and we think, oh, there it is. The journey
including, I'll take it because I want to make sure that we're painting a fully complex picture. I think part of that relationship with a teacher, a human being, a wise person, a sage, includes, this moment where, after a certain modicum of trust and safety and comfort and kind of magnetization of that space becomes, they fail you. And as a matter of fact, we used to say that. I remember that in a moment of deep conversations, very, very frequently, when a student would come to me and say, you disappointed me, that was the beginning of their real teaching. relationship, or a different phase of a different teacher-student relationship. And, you know, as profound as certain teachings that Daido shared with me and offered pointed out, some of the most profound were his struggle with his humanity and his edges of clarity and care and compassion and self-love and all of that.
That's a good teacher. That's a good teacher.
Exactly. And you know, he's now dead, but he teaches me. And, you know, it's so much of what arises in this phase of my life and this phase of my relationship with the people that I'm interacting, I now feel like, oh my God, I understand you. You know, it's like, now I see you. You know, now I'm getting a deepening of an appreciation and gratitude, you know, that emerges, you know, almost more than a decade, almost 2 decades after his death.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, of course, in Daido's case, in my case, the teacher we had profoundly disappointed his students in ways that I never really forgave him for. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. I don't think we need to explore that together. There are some times when people can go so far astray as teachers that they lose the faith of their students, at least many of them. But so tell me about how you matured, you know, through the monastic life. I mean, you became a monk. Not everyone becomes a monk when they start practicing and find that this is appropriate for them. Not everyone gives themselves completely through the journey. As we both know, the monastic life is a very rigorous one and requires, ultimately asks of us everything, right? So what did you discover through your monastic career, and in other words, what did you wake up to? How did it satisfy your deep need for understanding the nature of reality and your own true nature? And then, you know, it's a big ask, of course, but succinctly. But because it's setting up for the next question is what was missing? Why did you start practicing with psychedelics? Experimenting with psychedelics. I think that's one of the crucial questions in our conversation, isn't it?
It is, Stephen, and I do, you know, I really appreciate stepping into that territory again and again, to the territory of trying to articulate and fail, you know, articulate and approximate, you know, what the highlighting and illumination of the conditions that contributed to that shift, and setting up the kind of the historical trajectory, you know, so that definitely is a way of seeing it historically as a kind of a movement, evolution, maturation, disorganization through time for this entity, for this being. Then there's definitely another way of seeing it as a much, much more complex but probably accurate sense of a field of relationship shifting where different points are manifesting a different thing. And in that sense, I'm still very much connected and part of that community, if you will, but in a more conventional way. You know, one way to describe that is that, you know, my entry into the monastic life was consciously a choice to allow for a certain passion and a certain intensity and a certain desperation to be given to singularity. So this kind of the monos of monasticism is literally this kind of, that's the singularity of purpose, singularity of intention, of vow. And we know how powerful that can be. That when we find ourselves in circumstances in terms of schedule, space, relationships, where everything is essentially pointing towards a common goal. And I saw...
In other words, you were drawn to the monastic life because it asked of you or required a singularity, a single-mindedness of purpose, that you wanted to be in a situation where everything was asked of you, as I was saying.
Or it was more selfish than that, Stephen. It was absolutely about, you know, I like, again, the sense of a desperation that I was feeling, I think, at that moment in my life, in view of the success of my life, this kind of a double-edged reality, was that I knew I had to practice. And I knew that, and I wasn't sure why. See, that's the other thing, it's to become enlightened, to realize myself. That was just one part of it. I was definitely, drawn to a community of being with people and like-minded people. I was definitely oriented towards a sense of developing, there was a kind of a hunger and again, an arrogance to, I wouldn't allow myself to say that I wanted to be a teacher, but somewhere in the back of my mind was that part of this kind of a narcissistic orientation, of course. I was a successful physician, I was a successful pediatrician, I was successful, screw that, I'm going to be successful monastic, I'm going to become a successful monastic, become a successful teacher. But that the framing, especially of practice, kind of keeps a lid on that, or it allows that to be filtered in a somewhat safe way, not always. But the primary reason was the fact that I could just sit 5-6 hours a day, and everything about my life was taken care of in that particular way. And what I was offering, I also loved. The notion that I was maintaining a space where I could support others in doing this thing. Very quickly, the kind of the impulse, as much as the early impulses were all individualistic, it doesn't take long for that genuine, compassionate impulse to start moving through you, because you are confirming for yourself that this works. And so, when people would ask me, you're a physician, what are you doing? Straightening our cushions in the Zendo every morning and evening. And it was like, Jesus Christ, it's like, if I have a choice, this is a much more relevant thing I can be doing in this world for me than running a clinic.
Yeah, I just want to tell people who are listening that in the monastery, the head monk washes the toilets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely. And and we that monastery was classic in that sense, is that I've learned a lot. I can operate a tractor, chainsaw, I can change the oil on the car. I've learned a lot of very useful things along the way. But the biggest gift was just the amount of meditation that we were able to do intensely in the support, and also not just that, in a context where the fuel, the agitation of the container, the pacification of the container, the relationship, all of that was designed beautifully, and to support me in that process.
Pacification of the container, what does that mean?
Well, just that at a certain point we would quiet things down, and at a certain point we would agitate them. So literally the schedule reflected that in terms of more personal time versus time when we would be just turning the heat on the meditation, or possibility of resting, of relaxing, of going our own way, then bringing ourselves together and finding ourselves in midst of discussions.
You're talking about the rhythms of the monastic.
The rhythms of the monastery, exactly. They're very, very well executed. As I said, the one thing that we got right at the monastery is that environment over the 20, 25 years that I was there was continuously being refined by all of us, and by the intuition, by the wisdom of people coming through, to really create an amazing, amazing field of benefaction, and a kind of a sanctuary of sanity.
So did you have Kensho?
I still don't know what that of what that would be.
Well,
I really
Zen word.
I think that the
on the spot.
Kensho, no. The biggest opening was the one that happened when I was 11 years old, which happened completely spontaneously, in the sense of recognizing above the mystery, kind of the ungraspability of the nature of what a moment is, with an instantaneous and parallel overlapping of the beauty and the vitality of what a moment of experience is providing me with. So, in a way, you could say that I literally did see into the equality of form and emptiness, that at the same time I saw the impossibility of a moment to exist given the lack of its duration. I mean, I saw as a child that a moment that does not have a duration. It's not a second long, it's not a Planck's constant long. It doesn't have a beginning, it doesn't have an end, it doesn't have a duration. So what am I experiencing right now? And that wasn't a question, that was a resolution. And there was a sense of horror and absolute release that happened at that moment, and no way of organizing it as a 10-year-old. But that
that sounds like a kind of awakening to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, but remember that that's me speaking for something which was so inchoate, so impossible for a 10-year-old mind. And that probably was the gift in a certain way, that that reality could not lodge itself into any narrative, reductionistic, intellectual way of understanding. It just sunk right into my body.
Bypassed the mind.
Recognized it when the instructions and meditations were given. And
the reason I ask about that is because I stress, I emphasize awakening when I teach. I have the School for Awakening. Infinite Awakening is the name of my new book. And for me, working with people over the years, and in my own experience, what I consider to be awakening is a shift in the locus of our identity, right? So we take ourselves to be a separate self, surrounded by a reality that revolves around us, right? Serves our needs, causes us anxiety, gives us what we want, deprives us of, the whole narrative, which surrounds that point in a locus point, which we consider to be ourselves. And then awakening, and this was my experience, I had this profound sudden shift, which is, where the monk hears the sound of the pebble hit bamboo and something transforms, right? His relation to reality transforms, and suddenly, you're not the one in the center surrounded by an external reality, which is, of course, we're talking about a shift from dual to non-dual. Suddenly you are everything contained within the field of awareness, of consciousness. And that which is contained and that which is containing are indistinguishable, They're inseparable. So has there been, I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm just fascinated by this, how many people who are genuine teachers and done a lot of exploration have actually had that kind of a shift, a noticeable, one-time shift?
Yeah, Stephen, there are different moments, and I look at it differently. My sense is that an average person is having probably about 150 kenshas a day.
That's why I call it infinite awakening, Ryushin. Seriously.
The issue is the contextualization, because most of those people are in pain, in suffering, and yet, is their experience shifting towards an organization of the experience where the sense of self disappears and there's no centrality, no locality, no locus of consciousness and awareness when they're spontaneously driving a car or loving their kid? Absolutely yes. I think that, I agree with Jacques Engler, who, kind of looked at it from the psychoanalytical and dharmic perspective. I think that's essential to actually a healthy human being living their life. But for most people, it's not contextualized as something tremendous, big, enlightening, spiritual, religious. It's just part of the texture of their life. We shift. We continuously move.
It's also the nature of reality. Reality is non-dual.
Non-dual, exactly. And so it's just, to what degree can we release?
Yeah.
Or to what degree we release deliberately, so like a deliberate kensho working on a koan. That's a completely different world than what would happen quite frequently, because even in the monastery with people who are doing sesshins, you could see that. And as teachers who were watching it, some people just were suddenly in the zone and they had no clue that they were in the zone. Sometimes they were seeing the koan and they had no idea that they were seeing a koan. And that was actually a very, very challenging moment of what do you do with that? Do you verify it suddenly, and would that create actually a difficulty, or do you just let them take care of their life and their kids and the things from a perspective of deep, deep release, intimacy, or deepening intimacy with themselves? So I think that when we talk that language, the language of kensho, of satori, of deepening realization, of the challenge of to what degree can we actually release completely into that quality of living and loving and taking care of this world.
Or of being lived by
Exactly. That
reality.
point.
Yeah.
That needs to be contextualized. And I have to say that, this point in working with people, it's more about that. It's more about, like, it's more of a demand on me to really appreciate
Uh-huh.
what the real nature, not just the nature of the relationship with me, because that's narrow. That's an aspect of something that I can track, and I do track in my ongoing process. But I know that their lives are so rich, so complex, so filled with moments
Right.
of affirmation, deep affirmation of their clarity. And the challenge that I find is, how do I validate that? How do I
Right.
encourage that? And even when I say validate, I trip over the word, because it's like, who the hell am I to validate?
Right.
The
Acknowledge.
reality is validating.
Acknowledge might be.
Exactly. Just,
Knowledge might be a
feel
better
it.
way. Yeah, and this is a kind of link between the progressive path. I make this link very strongly, this distinction very strongly in my book, Beyond Mindfulness, and my other books as well. The progressive path, where you're working towards some goal, which through your meditation can show, stream entry, or whatever you call it. You're working very hard towards your goal, and in the process, you're reifying and strengthening the sense of a separate self who's doing something and going somewhere, right? And so, what we can do as teachers, in what I call the direct approach, which is what I teach, is to really keep pointing out how it's already happened, how it's already present, how it's already an integral part of your life, but you're not seeing it. And
Yeah.
that's really the essence of the direct approach, to keep looking at what's always already here.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I agree with that, but the danger there is, and it's the danger, I think, for a lot of people, is that if they misunderstand that, they stop practicing, because
That's
they
right.
assume,
Right.
they'll do, then everything I do is Zen, which was, the one
That's
of the
right.
big diseases. And so,
That's
again, adding aside,
Buji Zen, right? And they're called
exactly,
Buji Zen, according to
that's right.
Yasutani. Right. Right.
That's right. So it is. It's an ongoing, very alive process, and thank God for that. It's
Yeah.
like there is a sense, as I'm moving along, that the mystery of this just gets bigger and bigger. And
Great. I totally agree. The mystery. I mean, that's what is teaching us, guiding us, living through us, and to recognize the mystery and the way we're being lived, rather than driving. Suzuki Roshi said, "Follow the wave, drive the wave." You know, follow the wave, drive the wave. Beautiful. Sometimes we're moving it along, and most of the time we're actually being lived and driven and carried along by the wave. But to be able to recognize that as it's unfolding is, and again, Buji Zen is, everything's perfect as it is. So there's nothing to do, nowhere to go, no meditation to be done. I'm perfect as I am. And by the way, I want your
yeah,
money, or, I'm going to take advantage of you. And that's perfect too. So, yeah, yeah. So practice has its place. Suzuki Roshi, I like to quote Suzuki Roshi, my beautiful teacher. He used to say, do Mahayana practice, no, Hinayana practice with Mahayana mind.
no, that's kind of uh, along the lines with what Trungpa famously would do. And there is a person in our community who actually did work in person with Trungpa during the Dharma Datus that he would do, and during, that there was a one in somewhere in Colorado, where he was doing the Vajrayana teachings, and in the middle of the month-long intensive, he walked everybody at 3 o'clock in the morning, got everybody, 150 people, into the meditation hall, got them all to sit, and then he just walked in and said, "Remember Hinayana," and then told them to go back to sleep.
That's very similar. That's very similar. Yeah.
It's
And,
like,
and, and, and and what that means for the viewers is, do strict practice, do really concerted, wholehearted practice, but with a view that's vast, includes
absolutely.
everything, welcomes
Complex.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So then, how come ayahuasca, my friend?
You
Where's
know,
what
that
happened?
that that's still That's still dynamic. I want to just say something to clarify the term.
Please,
Because,
please.
when you're referring to me as a Zen monk, actually that's not correct. At least not in the tradition that I come from, meaning Daido made it very, very clear that to be a monk is to be surrounded to the community. Once I made a choice
To be what? Surrendered to the community.
to the community,
Yeah.
meaning that I had to be completely dependent. Actually, the term monastic has many connotations, but one of them is that economically, relationally, I'm completely dependent on others. I have no wealth, nothing else to lean on. And that's the key. That's the place of deep practice of interdependence, where the sense of, again, personal arrogance, personal will, and all of that are completely and continuously being tested. So when I left the monastery, I ceased to be a monk. By our tradition, I remained a teacher. That doesn't go away. I remained a priest. Those two titles remained because I have the qualification, and those qualifications are not predicated on the condition of being in the monastery. But I'm not a monk anymore. As Dalai Lama would say, I was a failed monk. Or I am a failed monk, maybe.
Right.
That's the way to put it. But I'll tell you the question about ayahuasca, and we can kind of move into it from different directions. But I'll tell you what happened recently, because it's 2 or 3 different episodes just sparked, and I don't quite remember. Some of it is actually influenced by continuously studying and teaching from some of Trungpa's, Chogyam Trungpa's teachings. Quite a bit of it is coming out of the Hongzhi's basics, because I'm using that book as a point of morning teachings.
Which book? Which book?
Cultivating the Empty Field.
Oh, okay.
The Instructions in Silent Illumination by Master Hongzhi, who was kind of Dogen's predecessor. And what hit me, that I think that, because I've always felt this kind of subversive quality in how I approach the psychedelic work, because I'm not kind of friendly to the notion or investment or the orientation that I think we in the West, or maybe we always, not always, I think that the indigenous model and the use of psychedelics has a validity that we, again, from the West, don't have access to. I think the model of use of psychedelic, the way it kind of emerged in Brazil or some of these places where the modernity was creating such tension for certain groups of people that medicine became a place around which to orient a community and give them some meaning and purpose and safety makes sense. But for us in the West, I think we're still struggling and trying to understand what and how to approach the psychedelic and the sacred, their sacredness and the potential they offer. And what's been happening for me lately is that, the way I phrase it, that I think that the important aspect or dimension of the psychedelic work is that they give you an opportunity in a context of a open-ended spiritual practice, especially the Dharma, to let you see the non-altered state of consciousness that they're offering. So I put the accent on the fact is, how is a journey of ayahuasca exactly the same as what's happening right here, right now? And it's, it's a great statement that, again, this friend of mine who works with Trungpa reminded me of, because I remember that quote. When Trungpa was doing a discussion of 12 links of interdependent origination, somebody pointed out in the place of the form, there's the images of a monkey inside of a house running around, and that's the representation of a human position with respect to the sensory data that's coming and starting to be organized towards what this reality is. And somebody in the audience says, what would happen when the monkey is on LSD? And Trungpa's famous answer was, the monkey is already on LSD. Meaning all of this is a hallucination. And the only difference is that you kind of pick the color of your hallucination. And in a certain way, that's the most important element, I think, in the engagement of the sacred medicine. Let's just call it ayahuasca, because that's what I'm speaking about. In ayahuasca, that it reminds me that even in the moments of most sacred geometry, healing that's happening, what I need to remember is that the flavor is exactly the same. And that is teaching me how to ultimately move in the different realms of the human experience, hell realm, heaven realm, from the perspective of a bodhisattva. So in a certain way, when people say that psychedelics are a training for the passage through bardo, I would say no, the psychedelics are a training school for you to become liberated, to move freely across all of the dimensions of a human experience, to manifest and heal and help other sentient beings. That's it. And so, it's like, it's not...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just say it's not an altered state of consciousness that I'm looking for. I'm looking for the non-altered state of consciousness.
Yeah, well, this is actually in line with a question. It answers, or frames even, more than even answers, but frames a question that I was prepared to answer you and had given a lot of thought to, which is, first of all, how can an altered state teach you to discover your natural state?
Exactly.
Right? Because and it also, the other question I was going to ask is, doesn't psychedelic journeying expand the realm and the perimeters and the notion of what non-dual means, because it includes all kinds of dimensions that we don't even think of as being included in non-dual. If you're going to be really non-dual, you include all the dimensions of the psyche, all levels of experience, and they're all, as you said, same or one taste, huh?
Exactly.
One taste.
No. So I think, but once that's clarified, then all sorts of other vistas open up, because I am not just looking to confirm that the non-dual nature of reality is the ground of being. I'm also looking to create a better connection between community and people in the community. I want to highlight the capacities for different ways of knowing and language and communication and embodiment and connection to the earth that can come through. Meaning I still have a headache and I still take an aspirin. And as a human being and a member of the human species, we have a big headache. And it's here that ayahuasca also provides a language, tools, appreciation, levels of knowing, which is, it feels like, oh, woo-woo. But no, we're capable of many languages. All of them are non-dual. All of them are resting in reality, but they give me a different way of connecting to understanding the trees, the planet, the weather. Somebody's
tell me specifically how that has happened for you.
Yeah,
In what way has ayahuasca, expanded your understanding of what is non-dual and open you to new realms of reality that point toward being of benefit to all beings?
It's actually quite simple. I would say that the biggest place is in my relationship to my sister and my nephew who's going through cancer, and that in space of ceremony, when I focus and I allow myself to surrender to what becomes available to me in a context of working with Caleb, with his cancer, and a way of working with Tonglen and opening myself to whatever the energetics may become available, which it's not that I actually can measure or verify for you that I'm doing anything at all, but can I open myself to the possibility that I am a conduit for something, some energy, some quality of appreciation and connection? Yeah, it's like, including that if I do visualization on his cancer, I do purge like crazy and throw up, and that doesn't happen in a context of anything else. It's when I'm working with his cancer that something starts to manifest. And again, then I realize that I get close to probably what I imagine how ayahuasca would work for a context of a community, indigenous community, where that level of relationality of the people,
interconnectedness.
Exactly, becomes available. And it's it's like when I say that I want to make sure that there's a humility in it, because the fact is I have no fucking clue. Stephen, of what's going on, but I do trust something. And this was always in that process of navigating with ayahuasca. I remember very clearly in the early journeys, it was continuously, there was a message saying, there is nothing new here. There's just something very old here, very basic here. Right. And then once it kind of came through, then kind of the focus started collapsing on, okay, I'm dealing with trauma. I'm dealing with deep psychological work. I need to potentially heal my mother's wounds of the Holocaust. Can this medicine help me? Absolutely yes.
Yeah.
Just like therapy can help me, just like sensory deprivation tanks can help me, just like being in nature can help me. So it's a palette. It's a part of the palette of, I think, being specific and understanding the intention, the need, the circumstances, my capacities to enter into a relationship. All of that matters.
Somehow I have it in the way I conceive of it. I've never done ayahuasca. I've done psilocybin, which I found very beautiful and transformative, and hope to do some ayahuasca, inspired by you and others. But my sense of almost with the plant medicines, in particular ayahuasca, is that it's like the ground is speaking to us, but not necessarily the ground of being, but the natural ground. The ground of our interdependence, the ground of our oneness at a very deep level is rising up through us and speaking to us through the medicine. I mean, not having done it, I can't tell, but that was my experience with psilocybin as well. For some people, I think psilocybin probably comes through the upper chakras and down through some download of divine. For me, the times I've taken it, it's always coming through Shakti. It's always coming through the manifest world, the power, the joy, the love, the energy, the transformative energy of the manifest. The ground of being expressing itself through the manifest. I don't know how ayahuasca works, but curious to see.
I'll share with you this paradigm or this way of appreciating. It's much better articulated by Andre van der Broek, the anthropologist, Zen teacher from Netherlands, who just wrote this book, Ayahuasca, Liquid Divinity, which really is remarkable because it posits this kind of way of appreciating it. It doesn't move towards the Zen explanation. It just basically says that there is this thing called ayahuasca, whose reality and its emergence is interesting because it needs human beings to become one.
It doesn't grow. There's no ayahuasca plant. It's a combination.
So human intention and this crazy interface of wisdoms mixing themselves, so suddenly there is this thing. And we can call it DMT, we can call it grandmother, we can call it entity, being, whatever. What van der Broek says, what Andre says, and what I would say I can not verify, but I feel is an accurate process, is that I would call ayahuasca a form of intelligence. It's not that it's a ground of being, it's as much a ground of being as everything else. That doesn't help me. It's an entity with its own intelligence and a language and a way of being and being conscious in ways which is so radically not human that I, as a human, will never understand it. As a matter of fact, that's not the point. That in encountering it, I am encountering and touching another, it's like a membrane where this other intelligence is moving it to me. As a human, I can't understand it. There's no possibility of understanding because my notion of time, of space, of consciousness may be completely different. Ayahuasca may be moving in 6 directions of time at the same time. I don't have that capacity. But in relaxing and allowing myself to open, that intelligence can affect me. That's all I'll say. When I start seeing a jaguar protecting me as a protector, I am back in a human consciousness. I'm now organizing that information, but I'm back in my territory. I can't ever understand ayahuasca. I can only understand ayahuasca when I'm non-human. And in a certain way, do I want that? Not really. Meaning that I'm just, again, like this question, I'm opening myself, and this importance of relaxation, of fearlessness, of trust, that somehow this is being informed by something where I'm learning how to trust this because I have no idea what it is. So this idea is it's good, it's bad, it's mother, it's grand. It's mystery. and it's
why do it? Why do it? Why keep doing it?
We come
What
back to
motivates
this.
you? What motivates you to keep doing it? Again,
Yeah.
maybe you partially answered this question. What do you get out of it? What does it offer you that Zen meditation doesn't? For example, divinity, liquid divinity. Zen doesn't talk about divinity at all.
Right.
That's not a framework that Zen. At the same time, over my many years of Zen practice, I saw God a number of times.
Well, I would
Absolutely.
say, I mean, it's a myth, or maybe not, but the fact that Shakyamuni needs to see the morning star in order for the enlightenment to precipitate, to me, that's divinity. It's like,
I
he
agree.
just happened to look in the right direction, and there was Venus rising over the horizon, and bam, that was the catalyst after
I would
all
have
of that.
said I would have said I've seen God for sure.
Absolutely, Jesus, of course, And so, why? But the question of why, Stephen, is good. It's like, I'm a rock climber. There is a little bit of recklessness about what I do, and in a certain way, the adventure with ayahuasca has that element. But there is something more humble about it. And my instinct and intuition, again, have to do with a certain quality of being forced or invited to surrender. Because, I was talking about it, as a Zen student, I've institutionalized letting go. I am attached to letting go. I know how to do that very, very well. And in some ways, for a good chunk of time, that was the thing that was protecting me from actually releasing, truly releasing deeper. So this
Sure,
notion
sure.
of
Because
relaxation,
if you are letting go, you're just perpetuating the existence of a person who's letting go.
and there
Yeah.
you go. And so this notion of what does it mean to relax, what does it mean to rest, is absolutely activated by being with the medicine, which just sees, any contraction, any posturing is kind of like, in the context of why I'm doing it, highlighted like a razor's edge. And it's like, you're cutting yourself on this particular place. This is the place to ask yourself again, how do you relax here? How do you relax your body? How do you relax your heart?
Because
How do you relax?
you're not being asked to let go. You are being forced to let
In a
go.
certain way, I'm being
It's
challenged.
stripped out of your hands.
You
Yeah.
got it. So, the sense of flow, of release to mystery becomes real. It's not an idea anymore. And it's extreme, it
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
definitely, has that quality. And there are other, because it's collective, it's very, very different when I'm doing ayahuasca by myself and when I'm doing it with a group of people. So that's the other element that's playing into it, that the tentacles and the way the medicine seems to move into the connection of people being together in their bodies, connected by music, by silence, by meditation, by song, by drumming, again creates a field within which my ability to open myself, not for a purpose of walking away with any compartmentalized knowledge, human reductionistic knowledge, but just to open myself to the possibility that I can run on different frequencies as a human being, and just open myself to different ways of knowing and different ways of manifesting that knowing in my interactions and care and love for others.
Right. And again, tell me a little more about how that is of benefit to the greater good and the greater field of existence of humanity and all beings.
Well, on both levels, that to whatever degree I can contribute, affect, and help, another being anywhere relax a little bit more into the intimacy with who they are, that's good enough. And then on a more basic level, if my capacity to be attuned helps me, never mind heal Caleb's cancer, but recognize that it's maybe time for me to go to Patagonia with him on his final trip, that too is reason enough for me to do this. And it's meaning that it works on a conventional and non-ordinary or absolute level. If we, for the sake of, again, deepening my, I use that word intimacy, because it's not so much liberation is a byproduct, but to the degree to which I can continuously keep asking myself this question: how relaxed, wakefully, how relaxed I am into the inherent wakefulness of this moment. To that degree, I become more relaxed, more open, more aware, and to that degree, the enactment of that is attuned to the interdependent field of that moment. I mean, again, I can give you an example because it happened 2 days ago. I was,
Okay.
with my family, snowstorm, car frozen over, and I walked out to clean the car. And as I'm cleaning the car, it's cold. There is ice. I'm slightly irritated. I am, it's early in the day, and I just, without noticing it, tightened up. And the tightening up was such that I stopped paying attention to what was happening in the house. And basically, the reality just collapsed. And at a certain moment, literally Hongzhi's line came to mind. And in an instant, I just said, relax your body. Like, it's okay. What will happen? And so I did. I mean, I literally just, for an instant, found the ground, found myself releasing. And it was insane. Like in a second, the crispness, the colors of the sparkling snow, the icicles came online. I could hear the family in the house talking to each other. I was recognizing what was happening. It was just like a perfect microcosm of, okay, here I am. I'm just a little bit more intimate through practice, through some things that I've learned, with that maybe spark of memory of Hongzhi just cascading through my being, and bam! Like suddenly the universe is, car is cleaned, I come back, make some pancakes.
And say again who Hongzhi is, for those who are listening. Yeah.
So Hongzhi is a Chinese, Hongzhi is the love of my life. Everybody's got their favorite teacher in the history, and for me, he's somebody who just continues to blow me away. So he's in China, living probably around 11th century, if I remember correctly, maybe 12th century, in, I think, the Mount Tiantong. So he was a rather known figure, historical figure, and a teacher that ran a beautiful monastery, and who had this uncompromising simplicity about him. And very much the proponent of what is called the silent illumination sitting, the nondual, open awareness, choiceless awareness type of approaching meditation. Shikantaza, just sitting. And at the same time, to kind of make him much more complex and well-rounded, he's also somebody who collected 100 koans, and he's the person who wrote the poems and selected the koans for the Book of Serenity. So he's not unfamiliar with it. Again, showing the complexity of all of this, but his central teaching was this very basic, very simple approach to sitting still. And he wrote a lot. A few things have been translated into English, one of them being the Book of Serenity, and the other one, this very thin volume entitled Cultivating the Empty Field, which you wouldn't consider instructions in meditation, but that's what it is. It's his way of teaching shikantaza and teaching how to be shikantaza and live shikantaza and sit shikantaza.
I think I would call it, what I often call it is non-dual presence. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
And that's one simple way of describing it, where there is no one meditating, nothing meditated on, simply being, consciousness. Alone would be one way to describe it. But a fine art, which doesn't have anything to do about it, nothing you can't do it. It's what you are. That's always the paradox. Again, from the direct approach, this is what you are. Recognize what you are, but until you recognize it, you can't really live it or express it, which is the gateless gate. of course.
And again,
You know,
it's like, to flip, to be recognized. It's, and that's that beautiful link between Hongzhi, because he really is affecting Dogen directly. Dogen comes to his monastery 3 generations later, where his teacher Zhujing is now the abbot. But in Dogen's writing, you can absolutely hear, hear the teachings of Hongzhi, like that, famous line that the self advances and realizes 10,000 things. It's the illusion
right.
that the
That's on
10,000 things
Hanja. That's
advance.
on Hanja.
Genja Cohen, yeah.
Yeah,
And,
beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, I love the word intimacy, which is a word that's often used in Zen to talk about that non-dual presence, which is it's a humble word. It's not advertising itself as something really special. Intimacy is the most natural thing in the world. But what do we do to avoid it or impede it from happening? Intimacy again is our natural state. It's our nature, but the mind comes in and prevents it from happening. So again, it's a return to our natural state, which is more of a Dzogchen term, but very much in alignment with the Zen tradition, particularly Soto school, I would say. Yeah, yeah.
for
Yeah,
sure.
beautiful.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah. So anything more to say about this? We're actually coming very naturally to the end. Let me look at my questions here.
Sure.
Um, well, if do you want to talk a little more about non-dual? I also use the term awakened awareness to talk about
Yeah.
uh, a non-dual presence, which is awareness aware of itself,
Yeah.
awareness aware that it is the ground of being, and resting in that inseparability.
When in waiting and anticipating this interview, where my mind would go frequently, Stephen, is towards the place of how a person can check for themselves, or in the context of a relationship with a teacher or a community or reality itself, that they're not deceiving themselves about the non-dual state. And I realize that koans are great, because koans are an expression of non-duality, but as an enacted state, very specific state. So they cease to be abstract. And it's to the degree to which I can see a koan and enact a koan, that actually is a guarantee that I'm operating in non-dual state. That if I can't see into the koan, which is essentially a portal, a gateless gate into a non-dual life, then it's very likely that I'm just thinking, that I'm actually creating a scenario of non-duality in a rational way. And so I thought about it, and that's the reason why I'm bringing koans back into work, because for a while, for about 10 years, I let them go. And then, I realized that there is an invitation, obviously, to test people. It can be very dramatic, but you can test people's access to non-duality by just seeing how they operate within paradigms that are absolutely designed to release dualistic way of processing reality. And I remember the thing that completely blew my mind about that on 3 occasions is when we presented koans to communities that never knew koans before, but they were shamanic. So Maori in New Zealand, Burkina Faso shamans in West Africa, and Brazilian shamans that I interact with in Brazil. It takes just a little bit of time, but when I introduce koans to them, they just see them like that, because their mind is operating in a non-dual state. But it's from completely living natural. It's a kind of a natural non-duality, which doesn't arrive through, dualistic wisdom processing way. They are interdependent entities. They process and live in an interdependent, non-reductionistic state, or a much more complex state. And so once we didn't even have to tweak them. That I remember when Daido was working with the Maori elders, and they were doing a sesshin. They came to do a sesshin with us. And after the first day, they were curious, like, what the hell was Dokusan about? And kind of Daido went past the niceties and the protocol and said, well, do you want to understand what the koans are and work with them? And he spent time with all of them kind of setting the land, and then they just went for it. And it was like, holy shit. I mean, their sophistication of intimacy with life, death, emotions, beings, everything that the koans are saying. Okay, non-duality of making coffee in a microwave oven, non-duality of your father dying. It's like, here we go. There is a way, an invitation and a pathway that both simultaneously, kind of from a Rinzai perspective, helps you generate or activate a way that the mind is working, and then allows you to play in a completely different way. And this is also something which is a little nutty, but I've done that. When I get really crazy during ayahuasca ceremonies, I'll throw a koan into the middle of the community. And again, sometimes people have known them, others don't. And boy, can people play with koans in that circumstance. So there's some loosening that's happening of how we will constrict into a more contained, compartmentalized, reductionistic way of processing.
Mind enters conceptual.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the only other curveball.
We've lost it. I mean, as Western, cultivated, civilized, so-called, people, we've lost what is something very innate, I think. And these are people who haven't, for the most part, gone through the process of losing it and then having to regain it through things like koans. We're trying to regain something we've lost, which I think is innate. Yeah.
Anyway, that's just the other
Very
thought.
good. I think that's a good place to stop. I think we've had a good conversation. I don't think there's much to cut. I think we had a great talk, a lot of rich material there. We could always do it again.
There was one moment where I've used a curse word. If you can edit that out, that would be great.
Not likely. It spices it up.
But I do. That sometimes
brings it down to earth. Thank you for listening to this episode of Non-Dual Wisdom and the Pathless Path. Join me periodically for wide-ranging explorations of spiritual awakening and the nature of reality, incorporating the non-dual wisdom of Advaita, Zen, Dzogchen, Shiva Tantra, and beyond. My guests include teachers in these traditions, as well as scholars, therapists, artists, activists, and others who incorporate a non-dual perspective into their work. I'm particularly interested in honoring both Shakti, the dynamic, provocative, unpredictable energy of becoming, and Shiva, the pristine, unchanging, silent ground of being, as equal partners in the dance of non-dual reality. Until next time.
Siri